This is Brett Olin.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall. You're listening to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Happy Monday. How's everybody doing today? Are you back to work? Are you still off? I know there's lots of different... some people took a lot of time off. Some people have a lot of time off. Some people will never stop. They're still working. So wherever you're at, hopefully you get to spend some time with some family and some friends. Precious metals. Should we talk about that for a second? Because 2025 is going to be an interesting year. We all know it. You got Donald Trump being inaugurated on the 20th. You've got an election at some point being called. Eventually it just has to be. The fact that it's lasted this long, at times doesn't surprise me. At times I'm like, I can't believe it went this long. Either way, I'm talking about economic uncertainty. I'm certainly talking about government incompetence on this side. And with deficit spending and fiscal irresponsibility unlikely to end anytime soon, now's the time to protect a portion of your hard-earned savings with a form of money that has been recognized for thousands of years. I'm talking silver and gold. I'm talking silver gold bull, as they are my go-to for precious metals with their complete in-house solutions, whether buying, selling, storing, or adding precious metals to your retirement accounts. Head on over to Silver Gold Bull, and if you're there, make sure to reference the SNP is where you heard it. You can get deals through that, and of course, they track everything that comes in that's referenced to the Shaun Newman Podcast. It helps me, helps you, helps them. It's a win-win-win. CalRock, your trusted partner in surplus oilfield equipment. They are the leading supplier of new, used, and reconditioned oilfield production equipment here in Canada, but that's not all. They got tank fabrication, new and refurbished fluid storage tanks, trucking, pump jacks, and demolition. CalRock.ca for all your oilfield needs. Clay Smiley and the team over at Prophet River, well, they specialize in importing firearms from the United States of America. And I just realized that you can get a discount with CCFR membership. So, that's probably not a terrible idea. They also have a sign-up sheet. If you haven't got a PAL, haven't got your firearms license, they have a sign-up sheet in store here in Lloydminster that you can sign up and get that, get that in the works, because I think it's important. Now, if you're well-armed past that and you're sitting anywhere in Canada, they are the major retailer of firearms, optics, and accessories. They serve all of Canada. Just head over to ProfitRiver.com, and they can get whatever you need into your hands, no matter where you're sitting here in Canada. Carla Kloss and the team over at Windsor Plywood, builders of the podcast studio table, and soon to be using their wood in the new studio coming out, starting here in January. Spoiler alert, the Shaun Newman Podcast, we're going to be working on building a new studio out in the country. That should be interesting. We're going to be using all the wood from Windsor Plywood. So whether we're talking mantles, decks, windows, doors, sheds, a podcast studio table, or how about a podcast studio? Look no further than Carly Kloss and his team over at Windsor Plywood. Tell them I sent you. Stop in here in Lloyd today. Cornerstone Forum 2025 is heading to Calgary, Alberta at the Winsport May 10th. Man, this lineup is going to be straight fire. Tom Luongo and Alex Kreiner, Chuck Prodnick, all back again. Martin Armstrong back again, this time in person. Yeah, you heard that right. Kalen Ford, Matt Ehret, Chase Barber, Ben Barron, all first-timers. Chris Sims going to be back on stage hosting, and with another new host, Tom Bodrovics. I tell you what, if you haven't got your early bird ticket, you're running out of time. December 31st, midnight, ticket prices go up. So, if you're waiting, don't wait any longer. If you're waiting for a speaker, I feel you. Speaker tables go on sale January 1st. So, looking forward to seeing all you fine folks there. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, make sure to subscribe. Leave a review, comment, fire away. Let's hear your thoughts. If you're watching on X and you're watching it, hit the retweet button. Just boop. Let's get it out to a few more people. If you're watching on Facebook, certainly like, tag a friend, comment, share, all the good stuff. Folks, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Enjoy the holiday season. Enjoy some time with family and friends. Be responsible. Let's get on to that tale of the tape. He founded Butler Mortgage 28 years ago, and he hosts the Angry Mortgage Podcast, where he discusses real estate mortgage trends and industry issues. I'm talking about Ron Butler. So buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Ron Butler. Sir, thanks for hopping on.
It's my pleasure, Shaun.
This is the first time you've been on this side, and I assume Western Canadians have been starting to see your content pop up on Twitter, probably other places as well. But in case they don't know who Ron is, Ron, give us a little bit of who you are so people can get a feel for you.
Ron Butler. You can find me at butlermortgage.ca for my business. Also the Angry Mortgage Podcast, and Ron Mortgage Guy all over X and other places.
How long have you been in dealing with mortgages?
30 years.
Tell me, over 30 years, what have you seen? Like, this week has been a little bit insane in the Canadian world with Freeland stepping down and other things happening. But I'm curious, if you go back 30 years and you lean on what you've seen through Canada, I guess I'm kind of curious what sticks out.
Just like only really two. If you look at a whole theme of 30 years, just a few things. Number one, the prices of houses has gone batshit crazy. That does not make any sense almost anywhere in Canada now. Maybe in maybe in St. Albert, Saskatchewan, it might be half-as sensible, but otherwise doesn't make any sense anywhere else. Even the poor people in the Atlantic have had Toronto people move out there to completely destroy their price normality. Ridiculously high prices, particularly in the last 8 years, and enormous complexity in getting a mortgage compared with 30 years ago. And for probably not many good reasons. It's just like everything else in our society. In 30 years, we've overregulated every single thing we do in a ridiculous way, added costs everywhere, and destroyed Canadian productivity. So that's pretty common. Also, I've grown really old and decrepit, and it's terrible to be so old. It's just awful. But those are the main three things.
Before we get into enormous complexity and crazy prices and all the things mortgages, I chuckled because I was listening to your podcast yesterday and earlier this morning, and you got talking about you're wearing a buttoned up shirt with no tie, and you're giving people shit because you're like, I get it, you don't like hearing about this, all you want to hear about is mortgages. But I was actually fascinated by that. You can't tell it because I'm wearing a t-shirt right now, but I enjoy style and dressing up and all those things. What was it about the shirt you were talking?
Clearly not at work, Shaun. Clearly not at work.
What was it about the shirt? I was actually kind of curious about that when you were like, you can't wear a tie with this shirt, and people say you can and you can't. What the hell were you talking about?
When you have a button-down shirt, you should not be wearing a tie. It's purposely designed to be casual. And you should not have cufflinks on a button-down shirt. You should have these when you have cufflinks. It's like this, right? That's called a French. For some reason, we call it a French cuff, which is like back in the old days. Like whenever there was any sort of STD, if you go back a couple hundred years, when there was an STD, they would always call it the next country over. Yeah, that's the French disease, or that's the Spanish disease, or that's the German disease or whatever. Or if you were in France, you'd say, yeah, that's the English disease or that's the Spanish disease. So I don't know why they call this a French cuff with a cuff link, but that's what you call it. And the cuffs with the buttons you call a barrel cuff. And the concept is no, you don't. If you have a button-down shirt, you don't wear a tie. Lots of people don't know this and don't act on it, but this is actually the way the world works.
Well, born in '86 on this side, and grew up going through the world of hockey where you have to get dressed up for games. I mean, you're pretty young when you start doing that, learning how to tie a tie, and on and on and on. And it's certainly jumped in leaps and bounds from then on what you wear to different occasions, et cetera, et cetera. But when it came to you talking about different shirts and everything, I was like, I don't, it's funny. You don't hear anybody talk about it unless you go into a tailor or a clothing store that's a little higher end. You don't hear anybody talk about it. So I just found that fascinating. So here's one listener telling you, I enjoyed the start when you were talking about a few different things other than mortgages. Now, flipping back to it, the enormous complexity. This seems to be a growing issue, not just in mortgages, but across the board. Is there any chance some of that gets, wiped away and maybe some of the complexity starts to go away, or that's not the way this is going to work?
You need a new government. You need lots of new governments. You need something like Elon Musk and Vivek with Doge. You need people who are willing to say, this doesn't make any sense at all, and we're going to just shut it down. Now, that's hard. That is really, really hard. So let me just sort of explain to you where complexity in our lives has come from. Complexity in our lives has largely evolved from fear of liability. That's what if you really dig down deep, that's what you find out. It's fear of liability. That's why on antifreeze, if you ever buy a jug of antifreeze or windshield washer antifreeze, it says do not drink. Like, what? Like, sweet Jesus, I know everybody knows not to drink antifreeze, but it's right there. Or on ladders, you got these labels that say do not put upside down, do not try to go up the ladder with the ladder upside down or something. Because it's all about liability. So if you look at what we do today about money laundering in the mortgage business, it's so wildly far out, the amount of energy we have to pour into anti-money laundering for no rational reason, except that it seemed like a good idea at the time. Probably it started shortly after 9/11. It just seemed like a good idea at the time to try to prevent terrorism, money laundering to do with terrorism. And then just takes, because if you hire enough people to do the work, it just takes on a life of its own. So now we're at a point where none of it makes any sense. It's all totally stupid. And the most fascinating thing is the money laundering regulator in our country is called FINTRAC. You probably heard of them. If you heard that name in your life, FINTRAC.
Yes.
And the interesting about FINTRAC is even though it costs about $1 billion a year to do this, both with all their salaries and all the salaries at all of the various financial institutions, and even just piddly-ass little mortgage brokers like us, $1 billion of expenses go up in smoke every year, money spent, disintegrated, for no real purpose, because after all these years, after more than 13 years of FINTRAC, prosecutions, arrests and successful prosecutions for money laundering only coming from FINTRAC, like FINTRAC found them and passed it on to the RCMP. There's about 8 of them in 13 years.
So less than one a year. We're paying $1 billion for less than one a year.
That's right. That's correct. Now, FINTRAC would stop and say, no, you're full of it. That's not how it works. We've contributed enormous amounts of information to the RCMP and prosecutions that they started, through other means, like found a guy with 25 bricks of fentanyl, and then the FINTRAC helped say, yeah, he was doing money laundering. That you told banks they shouldn't do something and they stopped doing it because you saw something. But if we talk about the hard, cold facts of why we should worry about money laundering is because people are doing evil, we need to catch them, we need to prosecute them, FINTRAC has absolutely no impact on it whatsoever.
Well, great. I mean, doesn't that seem, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
But that's everything. That's everything we do. So
that's what I mean. Yeah.
If you look at why costs of building homes or building anything has gone up so extravagantly in the last 30 years, you always come back to liability. It's about, we started digging and we found an arrowhead. We found an arrowhead for the subdivision, so we had to stop. We had to bring in hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of archaeologists and try to figure out this whole arrowhead thing. Whereas, prior to let's say in 1980 or 1970, people would just pick up the arrowhead, look at it, and throw it away, okay, and just keep on building the houses. We don't do that anymore. We obsess with stupidity and foolishness and spend billions and billions of dollars on it, on things that aren't important. Because the only thing that's important about housing people is building the houses and making sure they don't fall down, burn down, or get flooded. That's about it. Like, nothing else is really important about it. Like whether there's a purple-toed salamander in the area that needs to be protected, and we need to spend $8 million to do a study and wait 2 years. That's all completely stupid. Like none of it. It's absolutely ridiculously stupid. And yet we do it, and it just keeps compounding. For instance, you might find this interesting. In most big cities in Canada, before you can build a condo building, you need to spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on helicopter research. Helicopter research, okay? You have to make sure that you're not on a helicopter route. You have to have engineers prove it. You can only go to a certain building height. I asked the guy once, I said, well, can't the helicopter just go over the building? He said, Ron, shut up. That's not how this works. It's like, the helicopter people, you got routes to the hospital and not to the hospital. And God forbid that you delayed one person 15 minutes and they died, and it's the building's fault at that point. So I'm not making any of this up, right? This is all true.
I mean, at times nothing surprises me in Canada. Even what just went on with Freeland and then what was it, 4 different finance? I mean, between Freeland and the rest that kept going, no, I'm not going to be finance minister. And then Strong Eagle Man being the next up and that not happening, and you're like, how is Randy in line? Anyways, it doesn't matter. Just like to say, none of this really surprises me, but I find it hard to fathom that a helicopter can't, it's not like they're going, I don't even know, 11 times the speed of light or something where they can't dodge a building, right? It's pretty self-explanatory to be like, oh, there's going to be, we got to fly at this height, et cetera, et cetera. This doesn't seem like rocket science, but we seem to treat all these things like rocket science. And I go, is there no coming back to normality, to sanity, to, I don't know, as Pierre Poilievre would say, common sense? Like you look at it, in the by-election that just happened, Conservatives won handily. And everything points to whenever this next election gets called, they're going to win handily. Do you see once again, I lean on your expertise of 30 years. Is it something in the first 4 years where all of a sudden they can start to turn the corner and start to slide things in the right direction? You're like, oh no, this takes decades.
It's really hard. You can always make a start. I don't believe in giving up hope. That's not a good idea in any kind of a country or any kind of a civilization. Never give up hope. But it's deeply entrenched, and it's multiple levels of government. If you think about it, there's more people working at CRA than there is in the Canadian Armed Forces, in a job which is obviously easily digitalized. It's just reviewing tax returns. Shouldn't there be some AI that could maybe do that a little bit, like help out so there wouldn't be so many people? Like in other countries, they actually do your tax returns for you and then show them to you so you can question them if you want to. But we can't. We're ridiculous. We're literally ridiculous here. We have more people per capita looking at tax documents than virtually every country on earth. I'll give you an idea. The ratio here is quadruple the United States. At one point it was 5 times, but now it's only quadruple. Quadruple the people per capita, the CRA employees per capita versus IRS per capita. Like everything we do is kind of crazy. But it's hard to fight because you got to lay people off. Laying people off is not an easy, pleasant, or positive thing. In the States, they're talking about closing whole agencies. Elon's talking about looking at an agency, going in there for a day, asking them all what they do, and if they can't really explain what they do, he's just going to recommend shutting the entire agency down. Like just let them all go and close the place and lease it out to somebody else and forget about it. Now that's hard. That's really, really hard. That's controversial and it's difficult. So and it's hard to do here. It's hard to say. It's hard for Pierre Poilievre to get elected, and then 4 weeks later say, yeah, we gotta let 5% of every human being in the federal government go. 5% of everybody's got to go. That's hard. That's thousands and thousands and thousands of layoffs.
I just look at what Malay's done in Argentina is probably a good example. I'm sure there's others out there, and you go, it's hard, but where we're heading is I don't know, seems like an even darker future. Maybe I'm wrong on that, Ron. Certainly, I don't want to paint anything too dark, but because I'm an eternal optimist on this side. But you look at it and you go, they just released the debt. Well, what is it? The deficit's going to be $62 billion now, and we're just going to continue to print money. This thing that we're going to build I forget what it is. Is it 1 million homes? But then any home builder I talk to just laugh at that. I'm like, so they're talking over here in fantasy land and the real world saying, no way is any like this. We got to get things to mesh, and they're not. Like they're talking about something way over here. They're saying we won't go past this number. Then they go blazing past it, on and on and on. I guess I just look at all this and I'm shocked. And although I understand it'd be tough to get rid of people, I mean, the other alternative, I don't know. Is it any better?
We don't know yet. We don't know yet. I mean, obviously, it's not working for many people. When you really carefully study what's going on for the average working person in Canada, they are worse off than they were 10 years ago. There's a bunch of economists that would step forward and say, no, you're wrong. I mean, wages are keeping up with inflation, blah, blah, blah. But when you really have really wise and honest people dig into it, they say, no, that's not true. I mean, if you are somebody who is who bought a house before 2015 or 2016, you're in pretty good shape compared with everybody else. But if you're a renter today, or you are somebody who bought their house in 2021, you're in terrible shape compared with the past in terms of your own personal wealth, your own chance of growing wealthy, your own, how your income can keep up with rents or keep up with the mortgage payment. It's all bad. None of it's good, no matter. And again, there's a lot of people who have a vested interest in pretending that's not the case. Pretend they're saying, no, it's just a vibe session. Well, let's see what happened to her. But anyway, yeah.
Can you tell me, in your 30 years, do you know what a vibe session is?
Yeah, that's something an economist in the United States invented in 2022. That's a term an economist in the U.S. invented. That's a real term. So, and it's all because you can make up a lot of crazy BS if you want to. I mean, if you got some time on your hands and people are paying you a grant and you can sit around dreaming up silly stuff, yeah, you can do that. But anyway, I always like to point out that I'm not actually angry at any of these people. I reject the idea of hating politicians. I mean, I think, and I reject the idea of being abusive to politicians. I believe that all of these people, including the prime minister, including all of the people who just quit, they really believe in what they're doing. They're just radically wrong about what they're doing. They're radically wrong in their policies. They're radically wrong in their decision making. They're just completely factually wrong about what they're doing. But they're not trying to harm the country. I mean, that's just a misunderstanding that a lot of people do have. Because I've actually met them and talked to them, and I've talked to people within government, and they believe they're doing good and they want to do good. They're just stuck with bad policies, which create bad outcomes. It's as simple as that.
When we get into mortgages, variable versus fixed, and maybe there's some other things in there that you can tell us all about. Like, if you're sitting here and you're, like married to an American. So like one of the things that I've had lots of discussions with my father-in-law about, right, is they can basically get in fixed 25-year mortgage, off they go running, and they don't ever think about it. Whereas, they're like, why would you do 5-year fixed? That makes zero sense. Why would you do this? Why would you do that? We got listeners across Canada, into the United States. I'm not to bring it too simple, but at the same time, I'm pretty much illiterate when it comes to all this stuff. Other than I certainly know a few differences between the U.S. and Canada. To a new home buyer, when they're looking at this variable versus fixed, what do you see currently? And maybe you can just break it down for us.
Well, I'll address the 25 and 30-year mortgages in the United States first. Is that we don't have any market for it here. That. If we were to show some, we could theoretically, we have a 10-year fixed. You could have a 10-year fixed if you want in Canada. It's about 1.25% more expensive than a 5-year fixed. So whenever you tell somebody about it, they tell you that's ridiculous. I don't want it. So a 25 or 30-year fixed would be about 2.5% more expensive, and everybody would tell you they don't want it. So, I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years. everybody, when you tell them the 10-year fixed rate, they say they don't want it. Like it's 3% of the market for the 10-year, right? So
I'm in a very small portion because I got a 10-year fixed.
Yep, you're in a tiny portion, okay, like a ridiculously small number. Because everybody, when confronted with the difference in rate and the cost difference, say, no, I don't want it. I want the cheaper one. That's just a universal truth in the mortgage business. But today you would take variable. Variable's the best deal today. And that's because the rate's going to continue to come down. It'll come down in January 29th. It'll come down the next time the bank meets. It'll eventually, if your rate will go down to somewhere between 3.95 and 3.7, and could conceivably even go lower. You will also get a chance at some point in the late spring or summer to lock in, if you wish, to a lower 5-year fixed rate than you can get today. You're probably going to be able to get a 5-year fixed rate for about 3.89, 3.99, 3.79, something like that. So the future, if you're at a point in time when you absolutely positively know variable's going down, you might as well take variable, because this is what we know. The balance of probabilities is insanely high that variable will come down.
Why is that, Ron?
Sure. We had an announcement today. Canadian inflation is down. Canadian inflation came in below consensus. The Bank of Canada also knows that the Canadian economy is circling the bowl and will get worse and worse over the course of the year. And they have to take action, because if inflation is beat, they're supposed to get to what's called a neutral rate. The Bank of Canada is supposed to get to a neutral rate. And the neutral rate right now looks like it's somewhere between 2 and 2.5%. So we're above that right now. They're going to have to keep on cutting.
And then I'm curious, like, as they cut rates, what I don't know, is it ripple effect, domino effect? Pick your poison. Do you expect to come out of that, right? You're like, well, it's going to continue to go down. So if you're buying a house, if you can hold off, you're going to get a better rate here the further we go into 2025, essentially.
No, don't hold off. You can just you just buy now.
And get a variable.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair. What are the ripple effects of rates going down?
Well, the concept is always, if rates go down, then house prices go up, because more available credit creates higher prices. We saw that in 2021. 2021, throughout most of Canada, rates were down. Fixed rates, you get a 5-year fixed for like 1.69. So very, very inexpensive. The Bank of Canada went to effectively zero. They were only 0.25% was the Canadian bank rate, Bank of Canada rate. So it was ridiculously low, and the real estate market exploded across Canada. People overbid on houses, ended up with paying way too much for houses. So that's also come home to roost, and some people have lost a lot of money. But the reality is that when rates go down, house prices tend to go up, and certainly unit sales, the number of sales in the country of real estate go up. Now that's going to be a little different this time, because we're headed into a very tough economic time in Canada, particularly in Ontario and British Columbia. And that's going to affect people. Like, if you just heard your sister-in-law got laid off, or you know that your hours got cut on your job, or you know the bonus was smaller this year, you tend to put off large purchases. So that's probably what is going to temper, even though the rates will come down and people might think this is time to buy a house, they might also feel that the economic pressures are such that they probably shouldn't. So we'll see.
You're sitting in Ontario, correct? I'm not wrong on that.
I'm right in the heart of the city. Yeah.
When you say, the economy in Ontario is basically going into dark days or tough times, what are you looking at from Ontario's perspective? Because here in Alberta, obviously, we have different factors happening all the time compared to Ontario. What's happening out in Ontario that looks like tough times are ahead, or that you're in the middle of tough times?
What do you got? We got everything going wrong here. We have a decline in manufacturing. We have a collapsing residential construction market. We've got financial companies laying off people or continuing with hiring freezes. Like, you pick your poison. Everything that could go wrong in Ontario is in the process of going wrong.
Is that led to like a mass exodus as well of Ontario? Because one of the things that we've been seeing out here, I think I speak for a lot of Albertans, is a ton of Ontario folks moving here for brighter days, brighter future, opportunity, etc. I mean, I know the government of Alberta's ran ads basically saying, "Hey, come to Alberta. There's opportunity out this way." Is that factor into it as well?
It's a factor. Okay. The one thing about Ontario is nearly, almost exactly 50% of all newcomers to Canada come to this province. So we've added 3 million people from outside of Canada in the last 3 years. So about 1.5 million have come here. Then some of them leave again, sure, to your point. And some people born in Ontario have left for Alberta. But when you have this sort of bizarre level of immigration that we've experienced for the last 3 years, your population doesn't decline. As a matter of fact, if it wasn't for the vast influx of people, the Ontario economy would be much, much worse. I mean, just if you bring in 1.5 million people over the course of 3.5 years, you just got a certain amount of work you have to do to keep them fed and clothed and housed and all that stuff. I mean, they create their own economy by bringing in so many people, and that's what we've experienced. So, by the way, in Alberta, even though your economy is running much, much better than Ontario's, you still have a relatively high unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate in Ontario is 7.6. I think you're like 7.2.
Can we just, before we go to employment rate, did you say Ontario brought, and I it's funny, I've heard these numbers lots, but every time I hear them, I'm like, man, that's a lot of people. Did you say 3 million people, roughly 3 million newcomers to Canada landed in Ontario over the past 3 years? Is that how?
No, there were a total of 3 million newcomers to Canada in the last 3.5 years, and 50% of them came to Ontario. 1.5 million.
Okay, fair. Okay, so 1.5 million new faces in Ontario in the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Curious, because there's debates all over the place. You see videos on social media, et cetera, et cetera. You're in the heart of the city. What has that done to Ontario or to Toronto or to, just what have you seen having that many newcomers, different cultures, everything? Has it been a clash as experienced on social media, or is it something different?
Yeah, it's a big clash for racists because they see problems at every turn, right? But the reality of life is Toronto's has always been extremely, for 30 years, it's been an extremely multicultural city, and people are fine with it. Like, it's all fine. What's not fine is creating a housing problem. What's not fine is creating a healthcare problem. And all that kind of systemic difficulties from not having enough infrastructure to handle that many people. But, no, I mean, people in Ontario are used to people from other countries. I mean, very used to it. It's completely normal for us.
What's not normal is the fact that you got 1.5 million people and not enough houses essentially to go around to give them a place to rent, et cetera, et cetera. And I can imagine what that does to the housing market on how much it costs to rent things, buy things, et cetera, correct?
Yeah, or hospitals or doctors or all those things, yes. So for critical infrastructure that humans need to use, it's a problem. I mean, you end up with rents being impacted, you end up with wrong kind of property use, you end up with 30 people in a house, in a single family house, all renting futons in a basement. I mean, you run into a lot of really stupid things that have poor economic results for everybody, but mostly for those people. Mostly for the people who came here are the people on false promises. They're the people who are abused the most. Absolutely, they are.
You'd, I think, I don't know about. No, I'm pretty sure lots of my listeners have stumbled upon you. I put it out on X, like, hey, I want to talk some mortgages. Who should I get? And your name came up an awful lot. So I assume, lots of people have been following along there. One of the things that I was interested by was when they cut the rates by 50 on December 11th. Basis points. I don't know why I didn't say that. Regardless, you were talking about the next moves would be driven by events and different things. And you've talked about how, like, over, the course of the coming months into spring, you can expect rates to continue to drop. What other events, because like you're seeing all the stuff out of Donald Trump, right? You're seeing all these different things happening worldwide. What other events do you think people should be paying attention to as we move? We're a few weeks away from the end of 2024, 2025 on the horizon. When you look into the next year, what are some events you think people should pay attention to when it comes to the housing market?
Okay, so the first event is that because the current, soon to be gone federal government um, approved all this huge immigration level, they pretend it was just accident and they didn't understand how it happened, but obviously they saw it while it was happening, so you can't get off the hook. So there's going to be no more. I mean, immigration is going to fall off a cliff in Canada. It's already in the process of falling off the cliff. Many people are going to return. There's going to be effectively zero population growth by 2026. 2026 might be a full year of no immigration at all. So all of a sudden, people who had sort of based their economic plans on very high rents in BC and Ontario are going to find out that didn't work out for them. Because if you believe in what a government tells you, it may not always happen the way it should. Okay, so that's an event, and that's an event that's absolutely going to happen. When the government changes, either in the summer, probably in the summer, when there's a change of government, the new Conservative government in Ottawa will do the same thing. They'll say, yeah, we have, because the policy that they've discussed is we can have immigration, but only when there's enough houses and doctors and hospitals and everything, only when there's adequate infrastructure to handle that immigration, which is, of course, a rational policy. And, they also want to return to the old point system that we had previous to all this foolishness, and which was the best immigration system in the world. Without everybody in the whole damn world agreed we had the best immigration system, a point system based on a number of things that had to do with selecting a great candidate to be a new Canadian. So all that's going to continue under the new government, which will occur. New government will occur relatively soon. 6 months isn't a long time. So we are sure, the event we are sure of is less new Canadians. That's for sure, compared with the last 3.5 years, 4 years. So that's an impact on housing, because people who thought they were going to make a fortune on student rents, people who thought they were going to make a fortune on filling their basements up with students lying on futons, they're all going to get wiped away, because those people just won't be there in a year by 2026. They'll all be gone. Another thing we can be sure of is that the U.S. government will reduce corporate taxes. That's one. I don't want to lean into the tariff thing, because who knows? Those of us who were around through the first Trump presidency and paid attention to it also realized that about 60% of the stuff he said, he never did. I mean, I don't think the Mexicans ever actually paid for that wall that's still not finished. Okay, so some things don't happen. He brought in tariffs, by the way. He brought in tariffs on aluminum, on steel. It was sort of negotiated away eventually. I mean, we shouldn't lose our minds, because one of the things that happens with a lot of people in Ontario is when Trump says something, their minds explode, their whole heads blow off their necks. Okay, which is crazy. I mean, he says all kinds of wild shit. So we shouldn't think about that. We should think about the thing that we know he will do, because he has the power to do it, because the Republicans control all the levers of government in the United States. So the one thing we know will happen is there will be reduced corporate taxes in the United States, which will make their corporate taxes much less than ours. So if their corporate taxes are much less than ours, why would anybody invest in Canada from another country or from the US? It just means unless we make massive tax changes in our corporate taxes, we won't get any investment. So that's bad news for the Canadian economy. It's not a good news story. So those are the events that we know will happen. They absolutely will happen. And how do they affect housing and mortgages? It points that rates will probably be less, particularly on variable rates. And it points that people who were depending on rentals to make a fortune are probably going to be in trouble. And it also points to the idea that there will be continuing problems with employment, because if there's no reason to invest in Canada because the US is a much better place to invest in, then the little bit of foreign investment we're getting will dry up to zero.
I'm just curious, in your thought, watching what Pierre Poilievre says and different things he does, is that something he can change, relatively quick, right? He walks in, he does 3-4 steps, because one of the things I agree with you on Donald Trump is he says a lot of things. And part of it's just, the businessman in him wanting to get things done and move the needle and on and on and on. And he's an expert at it. But as you've correctly pointed out, it's but he doesn't follow through on 100% of what he says. Some of it is he's just saying to get the reaction. So when you look at Pierre, like that's a pretty bleak outlook for the next year on Canada, to be honest, right? As soon as Trump's in, which is not that far off, is you're looking at things not getting better in the near future, except we're going to have our own election. If Jagmeet Singh would just, well, he's not going to, but if he did, then we'd have an election real fast. But it looks like, sometime in 2025, no matter what, we're going to have an election. Is that something he can change once elected, comes in and maybe start to steer us in the right way where, you can compete with what the U.S. is doing from an investment standpoint, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I'll give you a little scoop. Jagmeet's not in control of that thing anymore. Like, people in his own party have decided that they are not going to support they won't save the Liberals in the next vote of confidence. That's coming from his own members. Like, he's at this point slightly lost control of his own party because it's just been too much. And there's members in his party realize that if they continue to prop up the government, they're going to lose their seats. So the next vote of confidence will go against the government. The highest likelihood right now is they're going to prorogue Parliament, they're going to suspend Parliament, they're going to create like a 3 or 4 month gap. 3 to 4 month gap before they have to return to sitting. But nothing can save the government now. The government's doomed. There's no hope. There will be an election. The Conservatives will win the election. What can Pierre do? I'm not going to pretend that I know Pierre Poilievre, but I am in communication with some of the people who work with him and some of the people who are his lead critics in the House, the people who are the finance critic and the housing critic and these individuals they are not going to fool around. They're going to take action. They're going to have a large majority. They're going to beat the Senate into submission. And unless judges stop them, they're going to make changes, like significant changes. I mean, the House of Parliament is the sole arbitrator of corporate tax in Canada. If they vote for lower corporate tax, there will be lower corporate tax, period. They control it. They're 100% in control of it. If they vote to change the federal criminal code, it will change. And crime will no longer be a free-for-all in Canada. They're committed to these things. I mean, these things are going to happen. So can he fix everything? Can the new Conservative government fix everything? No, that's crazy.
No. But you just pointed to two that I find very fascinating, because I'm like, like if you're not for Donald Trump, you probably don't want him to reduce corporate tax and everything else. But you just said maybe there's a way that could happen in Canada. You think that corporate tax could actually go down under the next government here in Canada?
Sure. I mean, it's their call to make, period. They also are in a position to say we're going to reduce the Canadian civil service. I mean, it's hard, it's politically difficult, but they've got 5 years. So if they do it right off the bat, and they say, well, we got to reduce all the employees by 10% or 5% or 7%. We've got to terminate every contract with a consultant tomorrow, because they're all like sort of day to day or month to month or quarter to quarter. So if you say like every consultant in Ottawa, bye, you got to go home now, and you're off the payroll. I mean, they can do it. I mean, it's doable. The Parliament Canada has control of that. So if they reduce expenses, they can cut corporate tax. It's that simple.
And the second one you mentioned, which I think a lot of people have been like, this is insane, has been this catch and release, this like system of criminals getting to do whatever the heck they want to do. I don't know. I can't speak to Ontario. I can just speak to things going on here around our neighborhoods, and it's pretty wild stuff. Do you see them, following through on that? Because I don't know. Do Ontario folks, are they talking about this, right? Like, is this a Canada-wide issue, or is this just something Shaun sees over here?
We have the highest rate of car theft in North America in Ontario. Like, every human being in Ontario has a family member who's had his car stolen. Every single person. in this province does. My son's car was stolen. It's infinite. It's an endless list. Like everybody knows somebody very close to them. If they haven't had a car stolen themselves, they know an immediate relative's had a car stolen, or the neighbors had a car stolen. It's just endless. I can tell you this. I don't think I'm revealing any secrets. The Conservatives have already drafted new legislation to be ready to go when they take over that will change all of this stuff. There will be no more catch and release.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask if you leave your keys at the front door, right? Like, I'm like, some of the things that have come out over the course of, what has it been, the last year, 2 years? Take your pick, folks. It's gone longer than that, but I mean, some of the comments that have been happening with criminals in this country specifically has been pretty wild. In Ontario, obviously, was the famous story of just leave your keys at the front door. So, they just want your keys. Pretty wild statements. You said in there, with immigration, that's like a given. It's gonna be a slow or a quick weaning.
Yes.
Did you say in there like a 0% or close to a 0% population growth? I assume it wouldn't be zero, but close to that?
No, 2026, zero.
Zero. Is that, forgive me, maybe this is where I'm over my skis and I don't fully understand. I'm like, that's not good, is it?
It's fine because the people are here already. So the way immigration works in Canada is that if you're a student who is here an international student permit, or you're here on a temporary workers permit, that is the group of people who are expected to become permanent residents. That's 80% of all of them are those people. And we have way too many of them. Some of them are going to absolutely have to go home, but they're here. So if they're here, you just have to convert them from students or temporary workers into permanent residents, and you don't have to have any new people come, period. I mean, I'm not kidding. I mean, even the Liberals love immigration, and their estimate was actually for negative 20,000 people in 2026. So I can assure you there will be virtually no immigration to Canada by 2026, almost none. Or conceivably quite possibly zero, because the people who are going to become permanent residents are already here. It's a misunderstood thing about the way our immigration system works. But people come here under one type of visa, and they're converted to permanent residents. So if 3 million of them are already here, we don't need to bring in anybody new. Okay, so that's why it goes to zero.
Yeah, the figure. Forgive me the numbers, folks, and Ron for that matter. Like, I remember looking at them, and obviously giant things have changed a lot, or things have changed a lot since they announced all the new things on immigration. But I remember watching figures like it was going to be 500,000 people in next year, and then 1 million the year after, and then the numbers just, and you're like, what is going on here? To hear that it's going to be, zero or negative is quite the turn of events in a very short period of time.
That's because it was a mistake. It was one of the many, many mistakes the government made. Like I said, I don't want to be angry at anybody.
Yeah.
I don't want to be mean to anybody. But at the end of the day, the mistakes were off the charts, crazy bad. And they've just had to face up to it. I mean, they created an unmanageable, completely monstrous scenario that had to be fixed. And the only way you can fix it is to stop it. So they stopped it. I mean, there will be ridiculously fewer immigrants to the point of zero by 2026.
People, one of the things, out here, different business owners, small business owners, I might point out, like not giant business owners by any stretch of the imagination. Tough times, lots of debt, different things like that. From a standpoint of like defaults, is there any reason to be concerned about residential, like a personal, or the business side of that, the commercial side, and defaults over the next coming years on your side of things, or from your view?
On the business side, very concerning for small business. This year will end as probably the highest small business receivership since the world financial crisis in 2008. It's just totally disastrous for small business. It's worse here than it is in Alberta. It's Ontario for small business is, I I think 25% of all small businesses in Ontario have closed over the last 2 years or gone into receivership. I mean, it's just a catastrophic mess. We have the combination of way too high taxes and really crazy rents. I mean, if you're running a small business and you're running it out of a commercial premises, your landlord just increases your rent to the point where you just give up and call it a day. It's bad. It's horrible. So yeah, on that side, there will be continued problems for small business in Canada. No question. It'll get a lot worse before it gets better. On the residential mortgage side, default rates have been really, amongst the big banks, have been incredibly resilient. In COVID, because of some of the times you didn't have to make the payments, but in COVID by law, by regulation. But like if we coming out of COVID, 90-day defaults, that's how you measure defaults in the mortgage business. You say people who haven't made the full payment for 90 days. Because everybody can miss one payment, right? Like who cares? I mean, but at the end of the day, if you haven't made the right payment for 90 days, that's judged to be a default in our business. And the percentage of people in default in 2022 was about 16 basis points. So that's like not 0.5%, not 0.25%, but considerably less than 0.25% of people were in default. Now that's climbed today to be just under 0.25%. It's climbed to about 22, 23 basis points, which is still ridiculously small. Like the US never runs less than 34 basis points in the whole United States. So even when their economy's going great, they still have 34% default with their banks. So 34 basis
points.
Yeah. So we have tremendously great default. There's a million reasons for it. I won't bother you with all of them, but it's not a problem. It's a hell of a problem for the person who's got to lose their house. Yes, that's a terrible, terrible, horrible problem. But in terms of statistically, no, there's no. If defaults doubled, they'd only get to 46, and 46 is just considered a little bad in almost all the United States. They'd say in Alabama, they'd tell you that was good. Okay. In Washington, D.C., they'd tell you 46 basis points of default was terrific. No, even if it doubled, it would still be absolutely manageable for the Canadian banks and not even considered to be a serious risk. So you can make the point that Canadians manage their mortgage payments very well, and that hasn't changed.
Historically, have we ever seen something? In Canada, historically, have we ever seen anything that would cause concern? Like I always hear from the old timers here about the 80s and what went on during that time frame. And if you go way back when, I've interviewed a few men that were kids but grew up in the dirty 30s. And we're getting pretty far back, to those stories. But I have interviewed a few. What would have been the default rates in those times where like the 80s specifically had 18%? And but in saying that, the mortgages were way less than what they are today.
Yeah. So if we look at default, the worst experience of mortgage default in Alberta was under, remarkably, Justin's father, Pierre. He brought in something called the National Energy Policy. He completely destroyed the energy business in Alberta. Absolutely destroyed it. Huge companies went bankrupt. People were handing in their keys and going back to wherever they came from. I think default rate went to as high as 75 basis points in Alberta at that time. It was horrible. It was a horrible experience for everybody. I actually lived there. I lived in Alberta at that time. Okay. So I met my wife in Edmonton. So I spent off and on nearly 8 years in Alberta. And I was there. It was horrible. It was ridiculously bad. But is it going to happen that way? Well, it's not going to happen in Alberta because the price of oil isn't going to go down to nothing again. It's not going to be like 2014-15 where the price of oil just fell off a cliff. That's not going to happen. But in Ontario, we could get higher. We will get higher. We could see defaults in the high 30s, but high 30 bips, high 30 basis points. But I'm not. That's not something that I lose sleep over because Canadians are just very good at paying their mortgages.
Curious, the 8 years you were in, did you grow up in Ontario, Ron?
I grew up in Vancouver.
Oh, you're a Vancouver guy.
Yeah.
So does that make you a Leafs fan, a Canucks fan, a Oiler fan, not a fan of hockey?
You'd have to have a mental defect to be a Leafs fan. That is the losingest bunch of losers you could ever dream of. Okay. No, none of that. I guess the closest I'd ever come to being a fan was an Oilers fan, because I lived in Edmonton for a while when Gretzky was winning all the cups. And so, yeah, I guess that's the closest I get.
Cool. I appreciate you coming on and trashing the Leafs all at the same time.
It's just true. I mean, it's just true. That team is ridiculous. I mean, they're absolutely ridiculous. Every time the playoffs come around, everybody in Ontario just looks at each other and says, "Yeah, they're going to lose again." That's it. It's all baked in.
I got a couple minutes before top of the hour. One last question. It was a comment. I don't know. When I see this, I'm like, oh man, that seems. I don't know what to make of that. It was Justin Trudeau back on December 4th, quoted, "There are more than 200,000 short-term rentals across country, like Airbnbs and VRBOs, that could be turned into housing. So we're giving cities more resources to crack down on those rentals and unlock more homes for Canadians." Do you agree with that, or should people be able to buy a house and rent it out, or where do you come down on that thought?
Well, if you think about it, if the house next to you was bought by somebody who turned it into an Airbnb, and it was marketed exclusively as a party house for teenagers, that was how it was sold to people, and you're next door to it. Or you live in a condominium, you live in a tower, and the house, the unit next door to you, is rented out as a brothel. Okay, because that's a good short-term, good revenue for short-term. Okay, so would you like that? Would you like that the house next door to your house was exclusively a party house for keggers on the weekend, birthdays, prom, graduation, whatever, big hockey game, and that's how it was. And when you came out in the morning on Sunday morning, there was just a whole bunch of beer bottles, and the sidewalk was lined with vomit. Would you think that was a good way to live your life in your house?
At my current stage of life, certainly not. At an earlier stage, I might have been like, "Oh crap!"
You were in the kegger. You were in the kegger.
That's right. So I'm like, right now, no, with 3 young kids, no, I would certainly not be interested in either of those scenarios.
Okay, so that's what's wrong with Airbnb. Airbnb violates normal zoning. That's what it does. I mean, you bought a house expecting you to have a single-family home in a quiet neighborhood, or a reasonably quiet neighborhood where you can raise your 3 kids. But if your neighbor turned it into Airbnb party house, that's not what the zoning was when you bought it. You understood it to be a single family home that a family, you could rent it to a family, and that's fine. But no, running the Kegathon Airbnb next door to you, you wouldn't like that.
So then you are for Justin Trudeau, just so I'm clear, of stepping in and saying, like, listen, we're going to give more teeth to different cities, and essentially to crack down on that specific example.
Well, let's be intelligent about it. So if you're in Kelowna and the entire lakefront is just for vacationers, then fine. Who cares? I mean, let's have Airbnb, let's have Vrbo in those locations. But if it's a residential neighborhood in Calgary or it's a condo tower with just working people in it, except one of the suites is operated by sex workers. Nothing wrong with sex workers. Everybody needs to have a job, but you wouldn't like it, right? I mean, nobody would like that. So I'm fine with short-term rentals based on the rational use of the property. Okay, so if you're that lakeshore in Kelowna, or you're someplace out in Kananaskis country that wants to operate short-term ski chalet and everybody understands it, God bless, go after it. Okay, but not the kegger in the house every weekend next to your house, right? That doesn't make sense.
That doesn't make sense. Ron, I appreciate you hopping on and doing this, giving me some time today. All the best to you out there. And if people want to find you, where can they go again?
ButlerMortgage.ca is the company, and Angry Mortgage or Ron Mortgage Guy on social media, I will appear. You just type in Ron Butler in any kind of social media, I will show up. So that's for sure.
Sounds good.